Namaste. Psychoanalysis and philosophy. Language. Language has been traditionally seen in psychoanalysis and generally as a neutral tool of communication. But recently, however, in the last 50 years, some thinkers like Wittgenstein, Saussure, Heidegger, and Lacan took especial interest in what language was. So today let us do our journey about language with our psychoanalysis consultant, Mr. Himanshu Vaidya. Namaste, Mr. Vaidya.
Namaste.
Mr. Vaidya, can we start with how language has been traditionally seen in psychoanalysis and social sciences?
Traditionally, language was looked at as a neutral medium, almost like the glass bottle in which you put your medicines. We believed that the glass bottle does not react in any way with the medicines. And so language was a tool for containing and communicating of knowledge, feelings, everything that we need to communicate. So it was a neutral container and a neutral communicator. So if I want to communicate something to you, I say it in English or Hindi or French, but what I say is not changed by which language I use. Similarly, instead of communicating to you, if I want to store it in a book, I can write it in any language and the meaning still would be stored. So communication, meaning, all entities which can be communicated through language, stored in language, in it is in its role as a container and as a vehicle of communication. Language was assumed to be or believed to be a neutral agent which does not react in any way with what is being stored or what is being communicated. This was first belief. The second belief was that language is a sort of an unrooted tool which has been created by the human race in the course of evolution. So it is a tool created in the historical social process. It is not something which is intrinsic to human nature, something which is anchored to the same land from where our mind grows, or in some way connected to the same laws which our mind obeys, or in any way connected to our thought or our mind. So there was no rootedness of language in our mind. There was no rootedness of language in reality. And there was no epistemological or psychological significance of language. So this is how we looked at language, and we take it so much for granted that it occurs to very few of us that one should even think about language. Heidegger uses a very good statement somewhere in a different context which is applicable here. It is too near to be found. And this is what happens to language. It is so near to us that we don't even see it as a distinct entity. It just happens so naturally to us. We learn it so naturally, we use it so naturally, it evolves in us so naturally that we find it even difficult to consider it as an object of reflection. And this fact of language, that it is too near to be found, also was at work for quite a long time in our intellectual history. In recent times, people have started reflecting on two aspects of language. One, is language a neutral container and a neutral communicator, or does it react with the entities it is supposed to contain or communicate? Is it an active agent in the process, or is it a passive container and a passive communicator? And the second element is language connected to our mind, our thought? And if yes, how would that connection be? Would language influence mind? Would mind influence language? Are they both working together? What is the relationship between them, if any? And the third is, what is the limit of language? And does the limit of language signify in some way the limit of thought? So the first is a normal social science question. Second is a more psychology question, a psychotherapy question. And the third is more of a philosophic question. But all the three questions pertain to investigating if language is an active entity and if it has some psychological, epistemological, or philosophical significance, and if it is maybe something more than a humanly invented tool which is for use for a particular purpose. It may turn out that uh, the disinterested neutral postman may be a player in the play.
Uh, has there been a change in the last 50 years in the way language has been looked at in psychoanalysis and social sciences?
Yes, very much so, because there was a wave of linguistic philosophy and linguistic reflection in philosophy and anthropology. And this has slowly started coming now to psychoanalysis. So the first we see is the important point in the discussion is of Noam Chomsky, who talked about uh, the structure, basic structure of the grammar of all languages. The idea there was that language may not be a tool that human beings have evolved in the historical process. It is not like a car engine or textiles that people evolved in the historical process. It may be that it is naturally rooted in us, that it's an instinctively anchored process, just as animals and birds also have their languages. So it may be like them that it's an instinctively anchored process, and therefore there is one universal grammar of language, a comprehensive grammar, and every language in the world has its grammar, which is a small part of that comprehensive grammar. And therefore, if language is instinctively anchored, then the question arises as to how these instinctively anchored entities may be related to other instinctively anchored entities like thought, emotion, and psychopathology. So this is one important pillar of that evolution. The second important pillar comes from Wittgenstein. And Wittgenstein talks about two very important elements. And he is a philosopher in that period, which is called linguistic philosophy, a very important period in modern history of philosophy. And two important points that we can take up in our context are this. One, the limits of language may be the limits of thought. And the structure of second, the so the first is the limit of language being the limit of thought. Second, limit of the structure of language reflecting the structure of sorry, the structure of reality. So the first was that the limit of language is the limit of thought. Second is the structure of language reflecting the structure of reality. So now, and the third is language being a construct which is created based upon elemental elements of what Wittgenstein calls as atomic facts, fundamental facts. Now, all these three have very interesting implications. Let us take the first one. If the limits of language are the limits of thought, then it would be interesting to know how this operates in our exploration of the unconscious. Because then there would be a limit on knowing the non-verbal or the pre-verbal. And those would then remain as perpetual black boxes for us. Because language makes its advent at particular point in the individual's life. And therefore something before that, and even after that, if something is remaining linguistically untouched, so pre-verbal and non-verbal would remain perpetually unconscious. And this brings into discussion rather, not in question, stand corrected. What you would say about the visual nature of the unconscious. That often in the unconscious, activities happen, both pathological and healing, both regressive and progressive, which are non-verbal in nature, non-linguistic in nature. They are primarily represented by visuals, at times even by tactile sensations, at times by synchronistic events happening outside. And these elements then would be very difficult to investigate if that was true, if the limits of language were the limits of thought. Second important element would be that the structure of the language and the structure of reality are the same. Now, if this was true, then philosophically it would be very easy because it's very difficult to know the structure of reality, but easy to know the structure of language. Because language is all out there, thousands of years of manifestations of language, and much of it recorded with us. So we know far more about language than we know about the world or about the mind. So if the structure of reality was reflected in the structure of language, philosophically it would be very easy to know what the structure of reality is. And one part of that reality would be our mind itself. And therefore, some part of the structure of language has to reflect some part of the structure of our mind or the whole of our mind. And then we would move from this very elusive, unknown, unconscious into the language. Once we know what part of language structure reflects this part of reality. And the third important element is of atomic facts. That if certain atomic facts make up the language and corresponding to them are atomic facts which make up everything in reality, then we can move from the atomic facts of language to the atomic facts of the unconscious, and not only unconscious, the atomic facts of the psyche. So then the question would be the unknowable elementals of the psyche would be far easily found through investigation of the atomic facts of the language. These are very important implications from Wittgenstein's work. And the third important element in this discussion is by Lacan, by Lacan, who brought in Saussure into psychoanalysis. And Lacan's contention was, and still is in theory, that the structure of the unconscious is based upon the structure of language. And that creates a very different way of looking at pathology and looking at the unconscious. So when we look at, uh, and Lacan calls the pre-linguistic experiences as the real ones, the world of the real, where the experience doesn't have a name. And there would be an in-between thing where the person has not yet learned language, but is trying to speak in his own private proto-language. And he uses a very important term, a sentence for it. He says, the subject enters language before the language enters the subject. So there is an in-between transitional phase of from moving from no language to language, and in between a proto language phase. And this creates a completely different Lacanian way of looking at the unconscious, looking at the mind, looking at the pathology, and looking at healing. So these are very important developments in recent times of how language becomes an important entity of reflection, and how that reflection leads to certain interesting ideas and explorations in the areas of psychology, sociology, anthropology, and philosophy.
Then in that case, talking about Lacan, do you think that positions that the unconscious is structured like language is true? I mean, Lacan's position is that?
I am not in agreement with that. I don't believe that the unconscious is structured like a language. I also don't believe that language reflects reality. And I believe more with Wittgenstein's second work, because Wittgenstein did two important works. In the first work, he felt language you can see as an entity which was a confederation of atomic facts. And there was a reflection in language structure of the structure of reality. And in the second book, Philosophical Investigations, uh, he talks about language being just a tool and meaning given to words just being out of social processes. And that's where the metaphors come in, that the same word starts acquiring a new meaning in a new context once a new event happens in society. Now, that is a very social process. It is not something ordained by nature. So there is as much of a social process involved, as much of an instinctive process in this language, and we are not sure how much is what. But I am definitely convinced that the structure of the unconscious is not modeled on the structure of the language, or that the structure of the language reflects the structure of reality, or that the limits of language are limits of thought, or that the pre-verbal and the non-verbal cannot be known. I believe in instinctive origin and instinctive comprehensive structure of the essential language, but in the social process that manufactures much of the language in specific. So we are dealing here with a biopsychosocial process and not a purely bio process. So I am not in agreement with Lacan. In general, I am not in agreement with him on many issues, including this one. And Lacan was fond of gnomes, and I have a gnome for Lacan, and that is Lacan needs a tranquilizer.
Right. Okay, so we come to Wittgenstein. How does Wittgenstein's philosophy go about on this topic?
The first part, he did philosophy in two primary books, two books which are well known. The first is Tractatus Philosophicus and the second is Philosophical Investigations. In the first part, he dealt with the idea that uh, structure of language reflects structure of reality. Uh, Language is a confederation of atomic facts, and the limits of thought are limits of language. Sorry, the limits of language are limits of thought. And very importantly, uh, that what one cannot say, one must pass over in silence. And this famous statement of Wittgenstein means that language primarily is a tool to express objective facts. But the moment we come into rarefied areas of philosophy, religion, spirituality, aesthetics, ethics, and art, we are trying to say what cannot be said. And there one must pass over in silence. Meaning to some extent that perhaps an objective truth of the type that we see in the natural sciences, we may never find in non-natural sciences, in the contextual areas or the philosophical areas. And in the second part, it deals with language as primarily a social process. And I think from both of them, we can correlate certain things to psychoanalysis. The first being the idea of describing a system as a confederation of elementals. And this is something I have taken up in my model of the mind, the heat model of the mind. How do you describe the psyche, the mind, as a confederation of elemental entities? And while you do that, how do you keep that model open for influences from the environment as well as uh, spiritual elements of grace and help? If you also believe, then the whole idea of karma, how do you keep the model open for this? Second element is, how do you know the non-verbal and the pre-verbal? And there I think we have to get past and not be constrained by Wittgenstein's thinking that the limits of language are limits of thought. They are not. In paranormal experiences, deeper psychological experiences, and spiritual experiences, we know that the language, the limits of language are not the limits of our experience or thought. And lastly, philosophical investigation tells us about language being something entity which evolves in a social process. And there we have in psychoanalysis two components: the component of the pre-verbal and non-verbal working of the mind, two, the idea of private language, which often is employed in psychosis or by small children, where they have their own meanings for their words that they use. So the language that they use is not the consensus language out there in society, but a private language. And the parents and the therapist or the therapist have to really understand their private language to have communication with them. And then to slowly bring them from a stage of private language to a state of social language, the language of reality. So I think these are some of the points. We can go in details point by point. It will be a longer discussion, but these are some of the points which in essence we can bring into psychoanalysis and explore them further.
Uh, Language automatically leads to the question of pre-linguistic psychic operations. Can you elaborate on this statement?
Yes. Obviously, language makes an advent in human life, not from birth, but at some point in time after birth, maybe 2 years, 3 years, at some point. And full language makes its advent much later in life. Obviously, it is not that you don't have psychological experiences before language is fully learned. Obviously, there are experiences. Not only there are experiences, there are traumas and psychopathology building up also. And similarly, just as traumas can happen, good experiences also can happen, and they do happen. So there is a range of experiences which is pre-verbal, something Lacan would call the real. We would call it pre-verbal. Similarly, in everyday experience also, there would be certain things which are not processed linguistically. I would call them non-verbal. They are not pre-verbal because we already have language. But even after having language, not necessary that every psychological operation is informed linguistically. There are many half-processed, unprocessed entities in the mind. So many impressions gathered from data all over the day. So there is a non-verbal experience even after acquisition of language, and this is definitely a pre-verbal experience. And this is something we have to focus more on in psychoanalysis, because how to verbalize it, how to verbalize the pre-verbal and non-verbal. Non-verbal is relatively simple, but pre-verbal, particularly the heavily traumatic part. And exploration of unconscious fantasy, art, daydreams, dream analysis, deeper exploration in meditative states, or deeper explorations in therapy if that permits that kind of deeper exploration. All of these are very important elements where language is not involved, but the mind is involved. And we need to develop conceptual understanding and operational tools to reflect upon, understand, and manage this area and heal this area or enhance its potential. Because this is an area we have less focused upon and we are less capable of. So this is an area which is of interest to Lacan and to many others who deal with the pre-verbal and the non-verbal. But this is also an area where holistic healing and spirituality can bring uh, so much of treasure of knowledge and basket full of tools to investigate and change something to heal and something for higher potential, which is rooted or somehow associated to this area of the pre-linguistic or the pre-verbal or the non-verbal.
Uh, does Indian spirituality talk about different types of languages?
Yes, that's slightly away from the classical Western notion because it involves mysticism, but spirituality does talk about different kinds of languages, and it talks about verbal human language, which is loudly spoken, inner language where you think inside but you don't speak loudly, a sign language which you use by action, indicative language which you use by concrete symbols, telepathic language, and very importantly, a very refined language called Sandhya Bhasha, the evening language, which is a language where you are able to speak that language only after the affect and the negative aspect of cognition is removed from your thinking process. So the negative effects and negative cognition is removed, and a highly metaphoric and synthetic way of expression automatically happens. And this is something which is used by very advanced yogis, and this also is a sign that somebody is really advanced if one is able to use it on a sustained basis. So the Sandhya Bhasha also has its own healing potential apart from its philosophic, spiritual quality and aesthetic basis. And then you have the mantric language, where sounds which are known in some known language or sounds which are not known in any language are used in a particular way to get particular effects, including healing, including psychological healing. So spirituality has quite an amount to say on language, its genesis, its types, its usage, and uh, it's used particularly for wish fulfillment and healing.
This was truly fascinating. Uh, I mean, Indian spirituality talking about different types of languages, and especially the mention of Sandhya language.
Yes,
At some stage, I think we can go more deep into this aspects.
sure.
Right. But meanwhile, we come to our last question. How do you think this area of language will span out in future?
My feeling is that it's a very important area, and once we get into the model of the mind deeper, we will get into the roots of the language in a much better way. There is definitely a connection between the two. The second element is about the social process and how creatively our mind can wire and rewire meanings and condensation of meanings and indicative meanings and associations. The social aspect, the creative aspect of language and our ability to comprehend it, create it, and so on. And very importantly, I think in normal therapy also, what statements to use are very important. And most schools of therapy have a ready-made list of statements to use. And we also have been telling people how to not use or use tone or words in therapy. So language has always been important in therapy in terms of the words we use, statements we use, the tone we use, when to speak, when not to speak, and so on. So language has been a very uh, important and most used tool within psychotherapy, all schools of psychotherapy. And as we refine language, and particularly with training in non-violent communication, Sandhya Bhasha will be a far off thing, but non-violent communication, positive communication, and communication with feeling, those would be some of the areas apart from the scholarly areas of the origin of language, the origin of ideas, the connection between desire, thought, and language, limits of language, limits of mind, and so on. Apart from those scholarly areas, uh, the healing potential of language and what flavor of language, or it may also turn out to be one particular language or certain things taken from different languages to create one language. The ideal language for healing or the ideal language overall for the world, one global language or one global language at least for healing. Those are far off things, but these are ideas. Like, can we take the best of all languages and create a global language? Or is there some particular form of language which is most healing? So these are questions of application apart from the scholarly areas. And I feel in the coming times, more and more people will get attracted to and reflect upon these areas of synthesis.
Uh, Thank you, Mr. Vaidya, for this wonderful discussion on language and its importance really, especially for the purposes of therapy as we are talking about it. And I mean, how important language is,
Yes,
which is something we've just, as you in the beginning, you said it's too close to notice kind of a thing. But today we have taken good notice of language and the importance of it.
yes, we have.
So thank you so much. And now we understand the importance of language in the context of psychoanalysis and philosophy. I'm sure we can go deeper into it in our some other video sessions.
We can.
And thank you so much. Do write to us at hvindia@gmail.com. Namaste.
Namaste.